Where does Halo belong in terms of traditional science fiction? You know, it's somewhere between hard science fiction and space opera. It has this wonderful sense of drama to it. It's humans with their back against the wall fighting for their lives.
What began as a video game has grown into a sweeping, multi-layered sci-fi epic, complete with books, graphic novels, and films. A meticulously constructed saga defined by compelling characters, gripping storylines, and richly detailed worlds and cultures. Halo the game begins more than 500 years in the future. Humans have discovered faster-than-light travel and are colonizing the Milky Way. In the process, they encounter a hostile alliance of aliens known as the Covenant. Motivated by promises of eternal paradise, the Covenant views humanity as an affront to their gods and have vowed to eliminate them. Halo's central figure is Master Chief John 117, a genetically enhanced, cybernetically augmented soldier in the United Nations Space Command. His revolutionary Spartan Mjolnir armor is equipped with an artificial intelligence program known as Cortana. When we first meet Master Chief, the war with the Covenant has already raged for 30 years. Escaping from a disastrous battle, the Master Chief's escape pod crashes on a mysterious ring world, a superstructure orbiting a remote gas giant. This Halo is a relic from a technologically advanced race known as the Forerunners, who mysteriously vanished some 100,000 years ago. As the Master Chief battles with pursuing Covenant troops, a parasitic entity known as the Flood is accidentally unleashed on the Halo. The Flood feeds on sentient life forms and seems to hold a clue to the Forerunners' mysterious disappearance long ago. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, the Forerunners were the most technologically advanced race in the Milky Way. With unparalleled technology, they explored the entire galaxy. They used their profound wisdom and understanding to protect and guide the many life forms they encountered. And then came the Flood.
The Flood is this parasitic organism that attaches to creatures with large brain matter, takes them over, uses their biological material to create more flood spores, and off you go. It's a terrible parasitic cataclysm. On a metaphorical level, they're the bug-eyed monsters. They're the thing under the bed. They're the id.
For 300 years, the Forerunners tried unsuccessfully to eliminate the Flood. Then suddenly, some 100,000 years ago, both races mysteriously disappeared. Even though relics of the Forerunners' powerful technology remain scattered throughout the galaxy, no one knows what became of them. With the Forerunners gone, two alien species, the Prophets and the Elites, first discovered each other in their search for artifacts. Shortly after this encounter, their races collided in a battle to control the technology that was left behind. Both the Prophets and the Elites saw the Forerunners as gods, believing that they ascended to a state of divinity. The Prophets, physically inferior, wanted to exploit Forerunner technology and follow them on the Great Journey, an equivalent of godhood. The Elites, proud, strong warriors, considered use of this technology to be sacrilege. This dispute sparked a war. Eventually, the Prophets and the Elites form a truce, an unsteady alliance that becomes known as the Covenant. The Prophets agree to share Forerunner technology. The Elites agree to defend the Prophets' search for the sacred rings, the Halos.
They revere the Forerunner as the creators of technology and a lot of the cohesion that holds their collection of races together.
As the Covenant moves through the galaxy, they encounter and enslave many alien races. These races include Hunters, a worm-like species that group together into a communal armor-plated form. Drones, flying insect-like warriors that serve as infantry. Jackals are employed mainly as scouts due to their excellent vision and dexterity. And the Brutes, a warlike race with great strength and stamina. And of course Grunts, the Covenant's cannon fodder, plentiful and strong, but also clumsy and occasionally cowardly.
The Covenant has always struck me as kind of a weird collection of races. They seem to waltz in and conquer races and make them part of their own collective, like communism marching across Eastern Europe. But they're all weird and they don't fit together well.
It is a powerful empire, with Prophets and Elites at the top, ruling jointly through a High Council. That council's most prominent officials during the Halo event are the Prophet of Truth, the Prophet of Mercy, and the Prophet of Regret. On Earth, overpopulation and dwindling resources force humans to look to other planets. It's a prospect made much more accessible with slipstream space travel in the year 2291, after the development of humankind's own translight engine technology. While inferior to the Forerunners' faster-than-light travel, this technology nonetheless gives humans the means to aggressively colonize the galaxy.
It was wonderful. They sent their best and brightest out to those colonies. They started receiving all these wonderful, luxury goods and food. I mean, you can imagine a planet that had 18 hours of sunlight a day and had these wonderful alluvial volcanic plains where you could grow crops with 10 times, 20 times the yield. So why not put all our farms on a distant world like Harvest? So it was a great time of economic prosperity, and of course it didn't last.
To deal with growing planetary conflicts, the United Nations Space Command is formed, becoming Earth's primary military force. By 2390, 210 worlds are occupied by humans. These are known as the inner colonies. Within 100 years, the interstellar empire grows to over 800 planets.
Once they started going out further and further into space, into what was called historically later the outer colonies, they no longer had the best and brightest to send out. And as things got further and further away from Earth, the ideologies of those colonies changed a little bit, and they were further removed from Earth, almost like the American colonies were removed from the British Commonwealth.
The inner colonies, closer to Earth, are more developed and politically stable. The outer colonies are responsible for providing raw materials to those inner colonies. This leads to friction and frequently open rebellion, compelling the UNSC to establish headquarters on a planet known as Reach, and Reach becomes humanity's most heavily fortified world.
An insurgency started up, and that was actually the reason the Spartan 2 program was initiated, to counter the insurgency of the outer colonies. Because you could imagine, if you're on Earth and you have the inner colonies and you have this unrest in all these outer colonies, my God, you're literally surrounded by a potential enemy that may even outnumber you. The psychology of that situation must have been fascinating for the people who were making decisions on Earth. Well, anyway, as things happened, there were encounters, and there was a military buildup between the inner worlds and the outer colonies. Spartan 2 program came online, and that's when the Covenant first found Harvest, and the conflict with the Covenant began. And it's just a remarkably good thing that we had that insurgency ahead of time, or the Covenant just would have waltzed in completely unopposed, because we wouldn't have had the Spartans, would have had an adequate military, and of course that's when the games began really at the height of that conflict.
In 2491, the Office of Naval Intelligence initiates the Orion project. Its goal: produce counterinsurgency squads of super soldiers by subjecting volunteers to risky genetic enhancements. Unfortunately, those who don't die develop severe mental problems. As a result, the Orion project is quietly shelved. By 2517, the security situation in the outer planets is dire, and well-organized groups such as the United Rebel Front threaten the stability of all the colonies. Using data from Orion, Dr. Catherine Elizabeth Halsey launches the Spartan 2 project.
Spartans are kidnapped as children at the age of, roughly 6, taken away from their parents, and inducted into this world of violence and a regimen of discipline and real horror.
Only 33 subjects make it to active duty in the year 2525. These walking weapons of war are stronger, faster, and smarter than normal soldiers. Each of these Spartans wears special Mjolnir assault armor.
Advanced piece of engineering costs as much as a UNSC destroyer, probably harder to make too. It's a series of strength multiplying and redactive circuits that multiply strength and speed. It really is a terrible thing that Halsey came up with in response to an insurgency. Rather than diplomatic solutions or conventional military solutions, they came up with this. And this specifically was, in order to indoctrinate the biological inserts into the Mjolnir armor, they needed to do that at a very early age. So they screened the population for the right DNA, and they were stealing children. They were stealing 5- and 6-year-old kids. They were flash cloning replacements who would then not do so well in the families they were replaced in. They were almost made to fail because the flash cloning technology at the time wasn't so great. They would take these kids, they would indoctrinate them into the military, train the heck out of them. It would make Ranger School look like, a picnic. Then, when they reach puberty, they would actually biochemically and biomechanically manipulate their bodies with almost a 50-50 failure rate. When I say failure, I mean some of those kids would die, some of them would be, hideously malformed afterwards, but those that survived had, incredible bone density, incredible muscle density, higher chemical response times in their myelin sheaths, so they were better, faster, stronger, with all this military training.
The armor is also capable of housing a smart AI, an artificial intelligence free of restrictive programming, allowing it to learn and grow intellectually and to develop its own distinct personality. In 2525, UNSC communication with the outer colony planet known as Harvest goes dark. UNSC scout ships sent to investigate find the planet completely incinerated. Its surface melted down to glass. This form of destruction becomes known as glassing.
When the Covenant come in and glass a planet, they use a combination of Fujikawa slip space manipulation and plasma to heat the surface of the planet until it vaporizes the atmosphere, the oceans, and leaves a glassy crust. Depending on the planet and the technology and the amount of ships, it could take a few days, but then you got nothing alive left. It's really a horrific ultimate weapon to destroying an Earth colony.
Orbiting the remains of Harvest is a single alien ship. It quickly attacks the fleet, destroying all ships but one. The remaining ship receives this mysterious message: "Your destruction is the will of the gods, and we are their instrument." The enemy is identified as the Covenant. Their interstellar religious quest led them to Harvest, where Forerunner technology had identified a large reliquary of artifacts. As it turned out, these artifacts were actually the human colony itself. This leads the Covenant to conclude that humans are somehow connected to the Forerunners, a contradiction of their religious doctrine.
Basic beef that the Covenant have with the humans is they have access to and are using Forerunner technology, which they view as sacred and holy, and the humans aren't supposed to have access to it. They do, and they use it, and for many religious and political reasons on the Covenant side, that really irritates them. So they have vowed in the Covenant War to eradicate them, the humans.
Thus begins the Human-Covenant War. By 2535, the Covenant has captured and glassed almost all of the outer colonies. They then turn their attention to the inner colonies. As the battle moves closer to Earth, mankind unites against the Covenant threat.
The Covenant really weren't used to seeing anything, quite as well trained or determined or well coordinated in their enemies before.
For years, the humans win isolated battles, but at a terrible cost. Desperate, the UNSC initiates the Spartan 3 program, this time using revenge-motivated orphans of war.
Let's face it, the Spartan 2s were extraordinarily effective against the Covenant. They could infiltrate, they could kill the Covenant like no other soldier in the UNSC military apparatus, but they were extraordinarily expensive to make, to train. It took, a lot of time, a lot of resources. The armor was up. Each suit of Mjolnir armor costs as much as a small starship. So the UNSC military wanted more of that, but they wanted it cheaper, faster, just like anything in the military. If it's good, they will reproduce it and make it cheaper and faster, and maybe not as good. But that's what the Spartan 3s were. They're kind of like Spartan 2s, but on the cheap. They were a top secret military program because they were also considered disposable. They were sent on the high-risk suicide missions.
Other special forces include the ODST, Orbital Drop Shock Troops, known as Helljumpers for their daring high-altitude deployment in combat zones.
They're really the elite fighting units. They pull a lot of weight in the war. They're, the special ops guys. They drop in, feet first into hell. It takes a lot of guts to be an ODST. Maybe you're a little crazy, too.
The ODSTs resent the Spartans. They think that Spartans are spoiled, that they get all the best equipment, and the beauty of that rivalry is completely one-sided. The Spartans don't care about the ODSTs at all, really. They just care about the job at hand.